Some units hide behind codes, some behind geography, but a few hide behind nothing at all, not because they were forgotten, but because someone made sure their names never touched paper. During the last years of the Second World War, deep inside occupied Manchuria, there were places where the snow fell quietly, and people vanished just as quietly. Places where trucks rolled out before dawn, carrying cargo no one dared describe. Places guarded by men who wore uniforms but carried no insignia. One of these places was known to the world as Unit 731, but inside that network of laboratories and field sites, there were numbers that even veterans whispered about. Numbers that didn't match any official roster. Numbers painted on trucks, crates, doors, numbers with no unit name attached. Tonight we follow one of them, a convoy that left its gates one winter morning and never returned. A mission erased before it was ever written. A disappearance that left only rumors, scorched ground, and a silence thick enough to choke history itself. This isn't a ghost story. This is a story about men who became ghosts long before they died. Stay close. This road has no markers, and the number guiding us was never meant to be spoken aloud. It began with a contradiction, the kind that sits quietly in a historian's notes until it grows teeth. During post-war interrogations, former Japanese officers repeatedly referenced special convoy units operating out of Pingfang, the main complex tied to Unit 731. But when Allied investigators searched for matching designations, no such units existed. No rosters, no paperwork, no commanding officers, just a number mentioned in fragments. The trucks from Group 16 picked up materials. Group 16 did not return that evening. Ask the commander of 16. 16. A number. No regiment, battalion, or detachment attached to it. When the Americans asked what Group 16 was, Japanese officers grew strangely quiet. They shrugged. They couldn't recall. Or they said it was a supply team, a courier team, nothing important. But the remaining ledgers from the Pingfang rail station told another story. On a cold morning in December 1944, 4 covered trucks, escorted by 6 men in full protective gear, rolled out of a restricted zone near the facility. Their purpose wasn't listed. Their cargo was listed only as Category F, Do Not Open. Rail workers later testified that a senior medical officer was present, overseeing the loading. They remembered him because he kept looking over his shoulder, as though expecting someone, or something, to object. The trucks left through the south gate, taking a road that cut through forest and farmland toward a series of field testing sites known only by code numbers. Villagers along the route said they saw the convoy pass, engines rumbling like coughing animals in the cold. The strange thing wasn't the trucks, it was the silence that followed. Hours passed, then a day, then 3. No trucks returned, no guards reported seeing them, no messages came through official channels. Instead, on the 4th night, a thick plume of smoke rose from a site roughly 20 kilometers from the Pingfang complex. Some farmers thought it was a forest fire, others thought it was artillery. The local police, still nominally operating under Japanese oversight, investigated the area months later after the collapse of the Kwantung Army. What they found was not a forest fire nor artillery. It was a clearing of scorched earth, blackened soil, twisted metal, glass fused into strange shapes, and on the edge of that clearing, embedded halfway into a tree trunk, was a piece of painted steel, faded, bent, still legible. 16. Nothing else. No insignia, no origin, no explanation, a number without a name. The villagers said the area had smelled wrong for days afterward, a sweet chemical rot. Animals wouldn't go near it. One old man said the snow around the clearing had melted in a perfect circle, like the earth itself recoiled from whatever had happened there. But the most chilling part was what wasn't found. The trucks, the men, the cargo, nothing. Only a number hammered into steel, and the knowledge that something had left the facility that winter and never returned. The road south of Pingfang wasn't really a road at all. Not in the civilian sense. It was a hardened dirt track, built by prisoners and maintained by soldiers who never explained what they were guarding. In winter, the path became a ribbon of ice, bordered by fields that lay dead and silent under snow. Villagers kept their distance. They said the road was unlucky. That morning, a farm wife named John Yu had stood in her doorway, hands deep in a basket of laundry, when she saw the convoy pass. 4 trucks, a lead escort on a motorcycle, men in protective masks, engines coughing white plumes into the frigid air. She remembered one detail. The men weren't talking, not to each other, not to anyone. Convoys always made noise, shouting, laughter, complaints, but this one moved like a funeral procession. Even the engines seemed muted, as if the machines themselves understood the gravity of their cargo. After the trucks passed, John Yu's dog whined and refused to cross the road. It planted its paws and pulled backward, its hackles rising despite no threat being visible. Hours later, thick clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the sun. Snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes. The world turned quiet. And then the road changed. A local hunter named Wei was the last person known to have seen the tracks. He said that the truck's tire marks, still fresh in the freezing mud, began to steam sometime after dusk. The snow around them melted, not from the top down, but from underneath, as if heat was rising from the earth itself. By nightfall, the entire length of the convoy's trail had turned into a soft, slushy channel in an otherwise frozen landscape. Wei told his nephew many years later, "It was as if something was burning its way through the world, but you couldn't see the fire." The next morning, when he returned to investigate, the tracks were gone. Not covered, gone. The snow had refrozen into a hard, glassy surface. No prints, no ruts, no sign that anything weighing several tons had passed through. Something else was gone too. Birdsong. There were no crows perched on the trees, no scavengers on the ground. Even the wild dogs that trailed villages for scraps kept a wide berth. Wei wasn't the superstitious type, but when he reached the grove where the road turned toward the testing fields, he stopped, because the air hummed. Not like machinery, more like the faint vibration of a rail line, except he wasn't standing on tracks. The hum was so low it lived in his ribs. He took one more step, and the world tilted. A bitter, metallic smell flooded his nose. A headache cracked across his skull, as though someone had split it with an axe. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. Wei collapsed to the ground. He wasn't unconscious. He was aware of the snow pressing cold against his cheek. But he couldn't move. Just before darkness swallowed him, he saw something. A shape in the distance, rising out of the drifting snow. Not a person, not an animal, more like a shimmer. Heat distortion where there was no heat. At the center of it, a perfectly circular patch of ground where the snow had vanished. When Wei woke up, it was night again. The hum was gone. The air was normal. He staggered home and spent 3 days vomiting blood. His hair began falling out in clumps. Doctors in the village called it winter sickness. His nephew later realized Wei likely walked onto a contaminated field test site, one created by whatever Category F cargo the convoy had been hauling. But here's the part the nephew didn't understand. Wei never mentioned seeing the trucks returning. Not one villager did. Not one farmer heard engines later that night. Not one guard at a checkpoint reported letting them back in. The trucks left tracks that melted the snow, and then left nothing at all. After Japan's surrender, American investigators found Pingfang partially destroyed. Much of it burned in the last desperate days before the Soviets arrived. The Japanese had tried to incinerate their sins, but the Soviets were faster than the flames. They captured a handful of junior officers, medics, and logistics personnel. Interrogations began. And out of those interrogations came something unexpected. Multiple witnesses mentioned a convoy that never returned, but their testimonies conflicted. A medical orderly insisted the trucks had been carrying veterinary supplies. A railway clerk claimed he saw the men loading crates marked with an unfamiliar skull symbol. A guard swore the convoy had been diverted to a classified location used for field tests. One man, an enlisted mechanic, gave the most disturbing account. He said the convoy belonged to a unit whose number changed depending on who asked. To the Army, they were a logistics detachment. To Unit 731, they were external transport handlers. To the Kempeitai, military police, they didn't exist at all. The mechanic described watching the men in rubber suits loading cylindrical canisters onto the trucks. He asked what was inside. A senior officer told him, "The less you know about 16, the longer you live." The mechanic said he laughed. The officer did not. When investigators pressed him about what happened after the convoy departed, the mechanic grew pale. "We were told not to expect them back. That was normal for them. They didn't come back because they weren't supposed to come back." The Americans initially dismissed this as fear-talking until they examined a storage area at Pingfang. Inside, they found a partially burned ledger, its edges crisped into black flakes. The entries were meant to be destroyed, but not all of them had vanished. The ledger contained dates, supply lists, and unit symbols for various transport groups. Most entries included both a number and a kanji designation, except one. 16, dispatch complete. No recipient, no cargo description, no return time. And under it, faint but unmistakable. File separately. Investigators asked senior Japanese officers what file separately meant. No one answered. No one would. When the Americans pressed harder, the officers invoked the same line again and again. That unit is not part of the Army. It reports to a different authority. When asked which authority, the officers fell silent. Unit numbers without unit names. Personnel not on any roster. Operations absent from all logs. The Americans knew intelligence smoke screens when they saw them. But this one had too much smoke and not nearly enough screen. Then, a breakthrough. One former laboratory assistant whispered something the investigators weren't prepared for. Group 16 were not soldiers. They were disposal. Disposal of what? The Americans asked. The assistant covered his face. Of failures, and of tests that succeeded too well. That was the first time anyone suggested the convoy had not been a normal supply run. Not an accident, not a lost patrol, but a mission designed not to return. The clearing where the convoy was last seen had an unsettling geometry, as though the earth itself had sagged and hardened again. When Soviet investigators reached the site in late 1945, they found no bodies, no burnt trucks, no visible wreckage except for that scrap of metal marked 16. But the ground was wrong. Even under heavy snowfall, certain patches remained bare, not warm, just empty, as if nothing would grow there ever again. Soviet engineers took soil samples. They expected phosphorus from explosives, or traces of fuel, or shrapnel. Instead, they found unusual bacterial colonies, anomalous microbe cultures, and soil toxicity levels inconsistent with any known chemical weapon, one lieutenant wrote in his report. The contamination behaves as though the ground itself was a laboratory. When they dug deeper, literally, they found something else. A pit, a carefully carved rectangular trench, empty, not excavated, not a crater, a foundation, as though something had once been installed there, something large, something heavy, something that required trucks to move it. And required no survivors to bring it back. The Soviets suspected biological test equipment, but there were signs that didn't fit. The pit walls were scorched from within, not by fire, but by something that interacted with soil at a molecular level. One investigator described it in chilling terms. It looks like the earth was burned from the inside out. Nearby, in a patch of frozen mud, they found 3 sets of footprints, too deep to belong to normal infantry, and too far from any road to make sense. The prints led toward the forest, then simply vanished. No drag marks, no blood, just gone. Villagers who dared to approach the area after the war claimed they heard distant rumbling at night, long after the Japanese surrender. Some said they saw flickering orange lights beneath the snow, as if the soil itself was glowing. One old woman swore that certain trees near the clearing breathed, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. Her grandson said she was senile. Maybe she was, but here's the part no one could explain. 3 Soviet soldiers assigned to guard the site developed acute fever within 48 hours. Blisters formed on their arms and necks. One began coughing black mucus. Their Geiger counters showed nothing unusual, yet the symptoms worsened. All 3 men were transferred to a hospital in Harbin under sealed orders. None survived. Their medical files were classified. To this day, no nation claims responsibility for that field. Not China, not Russia, not Japan. The land is unmarked on satellite maps, a blank patch, as if the pixels themselves refuse to render what happened there. In 1952, during the Korean War, an unexpected figure resurfaced. Captain Hiroshi Nakamura, a logistics officer once attached to the Kwangtung Army's Secret Operations Division. He had avoided prosecution after the war by trading information with American intelligence, a common arrangement for former Unit 731 personnel. Most of these men cooperated fully. Nakamura, however, only gave fragments, until the night he cracked. According to declassified CIA memos, Nakamura suffered recurring nightmares. He told his handlers he wanted everything off his chest. They agreed to an informal interview. The transcript, the parts that weren't blacked out, reads like the confession of a man speaking from inside a fever dream. The trucks did not break down. They did not get lost. They drove into the field. They unloaded. Then they stayed. Stayed how? The interrogator asked. Nakamura shook his head. The men understood. 16 was always one way. When pressed about the cargo, Nakamura grew agitated. It was not meant for storage or for delivery. It was meant for release. They were testing dispersion in winter conditions. Dispersion of what? Silence, the interrogator insisted. Nakamura finally whispered. Aerosolized material, not gas, not liquid, something that lived. Then, in a moment that was removed from the official copy, but preserved in a handwritten note by one of the analysts, Nakamura said, "We were told the convoy would not return, not because of operational risk, but because the experiment was designed to swallow itself." That phrase unsettled everyone. The interrogator asked him to clarify. Nakamura continued. 16 were instructed to release the material and remain in the field until contamination stabilized. Their deaths were part of the calculation. If that was true, then the disappearance of the convoy wasn't a mystery at all. It was the intended outcome. But Nakamura wasn't finished. He claimed that after the experiment, senior officers at Pingfang destroyed every document associated with Group 16. Their personnel files, their transport logs, their barracks assignments, even their medical histories. He said one superior officer told him, "If their names survive, the program dies." The Americans asked why he was speaking now. His answer was quiet. "Because I hear them at night. The men, their trucks, the engines that never turned around." A few weeks later, Nakamura was found dead in his apartment. Official cause? Suicide. But the neighbors reported hearing knocking in the hallway that evening. Heavy knocking, like boots on the floor. When they opened their doors, no one was there. In the decades that followed, the clearing where the convoy vanished became a forbidden zone. Farmers refused to plant near it. Herders avoided it entirely. Even black market scavengers, who stripped abandoned wartime sites for scrap, stayed away. But in 1978, a Chinese geological survey crew was assigned to map the region. They didn't know the history. They didn't know the warnings. They set up camp near the clearing. On the second night, one geologist noticed an orange shimmer in the distance, a faint glow rippling through the trees. He assumed it was a lantern. He walked closer. His colleagues found him crawling back to camp an hour later, delirious, coughing blood, and screaming about shadows walking inside the light. He died within 24 hours. His equipment, compasses, sample jars, notebooks, was collected by military authorities. The rest of the crew was evacuated and placed under medical observation. Their diaries, confiscated later, revealed something chilling. They described hearing engines in the night, engines that came toward them, then faded, then came again. One wrote, "It sounded like trucks circling us, but there were no tracks in the snow." Another, "The ground glowed where the sound was strongest." A third, "I saw numbers painted on something large, white numbers, but no shape. The number was always the same, 16. After that incident, the Chinese government fenced off the entire area and classified it as a restricted environmental hazard zone. No explanation was released. Satellite imagery from the 1990s shows something unnerving. The snow around the site melts faster than surrounding areas every winter. A perfect ring, as if something beneath the earth still radiates heat or memory. And here is the strangest part. A United Nations environmental team attempted to analyze archived soil samples from the region in 2003. Their equipment registered a growth pattern consistent with bacteria, but not with any known strain connected to plague, cholera, typhus, or anthrax. It was something else, something engineered, something designed to die quickly. And to kill quickly. A perfect weapon, a perfect secret, a perfect erasure. Except for one problem. Secrets don't stay buried. They glow, slowly, faintly, in the dark. Some roads lead to villages, some lead to cities, and some lead to places that should never have existed. The convoy from Pingfang didn't just disappear. It was meant to disappear. Men erased not by war, but by design. A number painted on steel, a pit burned from the inside, footprints that melted the snow, engines that echo decades after the trucks are gone. These aren't ghosts. They're the residue of a truth too poisonous to keep, and too dangerous to fully destroy. History tries to forget, nature tries to heal, but some things leave scars in the soil, whispers in the documents, and shadows that move long after the bodies are gone. I'm Captain Nightwhisper, and this was the number with no name, the story of a convoy that left its gate and never came back. If you're still awake, ask yourself, what else is out there just beyond the edge of the page, and who or what is still waiting on that road?